Subsidy wokusebenza. Yeah, shungakisi. Ulokufanele band stream ka.
Yes, right.
Right. Thank you very much, viewers. Welcome to this program. We have been long waiting to come to you and to discuss on the very program that we are going to be having. This is our first episode, and definitely we'll be having more episodes. And these episodes are only possible if you, from your own houses, comfort of your homes, send us questions, inquiries, and some of the topics that you think are needed to be discussed on this program, the Legal Talk. And today, like I have always promised you, I am joined by Mr. Thoughts Deme. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Pastor Eddie.
Yeah, now, the reason why we have Advocate Thoughts Deme in the house, in the studio today, is because we want to discuss on the, what do you call it, a legislation, a law, a rule, or a constitution? What is it?
Well, let's just call them the law.
All right, thank you very much.
Life is for everyone, yeah?
All right, so we're going to be talking about the law and your marriage.
That's right.
The law and my marriage.
In my marriage as well.
Now, having started on that note, why is it necessary to have this conversation?
Believe you me, Pastor Eddie, it's very necessary. For those who want to get married, for those who are already in marriage, for the children of the people who are married, it's very necessary because the different types of marriage, they come with different advantages and disadvantages. They also come with different obligations and different rights. There are different legal consequences to tampering with someone's marriage if the marriage is perhaps a civil marriage. So it's very necessary for us to discuss on this very important topic. It comes under the ambit of what we call family law.
Family law.
Family law.
All right.
So, in the family, there is the law that regulates us.
My own family.
Indeed.
This is interesting. So what are the laws that deal with marriages in Zimbabwe?
Well, let me begin by highlighting that previously we had a fragmented approach to our marriage laws, whereby we used to have what we call the Marriage Act, the Chapter 5.11, the so-called Christian marriage, or the appropriately termed the civil marriage, what the old generation termed the Chapter 37. Then we also had what we termed the customary marriages under the Chapter 5.07. And we also had the unregistered customary law union, and we also had what we termed living together, what people derogatively termed kuchaya mapoto. So those were the different kinds of marriage that existed until recently, when we had a new act of parliament, which is now called the Marriages Act, Chapter 5.15, which sort of brought all these marriages under one roof and tried to accord them some respectability, particularly those marriages which hitherto were not quite recognized or were at a disadvantage. But we are going to ventilate that topic in detail later on.
So what is marriage?
Interesting. The Act defines marriage simply as a marriage, or yes, it says a marriage which is contracted in terms of this act, or formalized in terms of the act, which is the Marriages Act, Chapter 5.15. That is what is termed a marriage. So it has to be solemnized and registered or recognized in terms of the Marriages Act for it to be characterized as a marriage. But for me, really, and for all of us, I think a marriage may be defined as a legally recognized or a formal union between two consenting people to enter into a formal personal relationship
You said legally.
legally.
Who legalizes that?
The state.
So if I just pick a woman on the street and we live together, I'm not legally married.
We are going to discuss about that, but yes, previously it was not like that, but
Okay.
now with the coming in of the new act,
Okay.
there are some changes that have been linked to such kinds of arrangements, and we are going to look at it in detail. And I also need to point out at this particular moment to avoid confusion, because we know we live in a global village.
Yes.
So in other jurisdictions, marriage can be between two persons.
Okay.
A man and a
All
man,
right.
a woman and a woman. But in our jurisdiction, it has to be a man and a woman.
Okay.
Yes.
So let's begin with civil marriages. What kind of an animal is this?
Civil marriage is it's just a marriage which is contracted under the general law.
Okay.
That is what we term a civil marriage. Now, it is a monogamous kind of a marriage, which is a lawful union of two persons to the exclusion of any other persons who are not part to that marriage. So this kind of a marriage is one which has got very strict requirements for one to enter into, and also for the outside world, how they interact with people who are in such kind of a marriage. So that's a civil marriage for you.
What, give us one or two requirements, or whichever way you may want to bring it out of this kind of contract, if you can call it.
Yes. For this type of a marriage, we have formalities.
Okay.
Number one. And we also have requirements. Now, let me begin by touching on the requirements. The first one is age.
Okay.
But this one cuts across every other marriage, where we are saying it has to be someone who has attained the majority status. By that we mean someone who has attained the age of 18. Now, you will realize that previously, in the now repealed Marriage Act, Chapter 5.07, it permitted someone of 16 years
to get married
with the consent of a parent. But
Okay.
now, with the coming in of this particular Marriage Act, Chapter 5.15,
Right.
it's strictly someone who has attained majority status.
So, which means even if the family is consenting to my 16-year-old daughter to get married, it's against the law, because she has to be 18.
They can't consent. Period.
So you can't consent against the law.
You can't consent against the law.
So the consent of a parent has to be within the law.
Yes, it has to be within the law. That is when we are talking now in terms of the other marriages. But for this particular kind of marriage, the civil marriage,
Yeah.
it doesn't even require the consent of a parent for a girl or for a boy to get married. But we are going to touch about it in detail.
Okay. What about the formalities?
Now, before we go to the formalities, I also need to talk about the relationship of the parties. This is very important.
Okay.
Particularly in this world where a lot of crazy things are happening. Now, there is a prohibited degree of affinity or consanguinity, or a prohibited degree of relationship,
Okay.
whereby parties cannot get married. For example, okay, some are pretty straightforward. A father or a parent and a child, they cannot get married. A brother and a sister, they cannot get married. The other less known, perhaps, is in a situation whereby a stepchild cannot get married to a step-parent, even after the dissolution of the marriage of those people.
Okay.
So it's prohibited in terms of the law. And even uncle and nephew or aunt and niece, they cannot marry.
Oh.
Yes. And also, cousins, if they are what we call second generation cousins, they can also not marry. In terms of our law, it's actually a criminal offense, which which attracts a criminal sanction if that is get into such kind of marriages.
Wow.
Then the other requirement that we also need to speak about is that the two people who are part to the marriage need to give their consent.
All right.
Yes, they have to be of age, and they have to be capable of consenting. They also need to be a man and a woman, as I have already highlighted, and they also need not to be married to anyone else. So, which means that someone who is already in another civil marriage cannot contract a new marriage or another kind of marriage when this first marriage is still existing.
Okay.
So that is the requirements. And now when we are talking of the formalities, yes, there are formalities, of course. There are formalities that have to be followed before the marriage itself. Now, lobola payment is not one of them. I'm sorry to disappoint you. It's not a legal requirement. But there are formalities that are expected of it, law. For instance,
So the lobola part is not part of the law.
It's not part of the law. I'm sorry to disappoint some of our viewers, especially in our patriarchal society. But yes, that is the position. It's not part of the law. People can just decide to get married without the payment of lobola. But of course, being Africans, sometimes we have to follow certain channels to arrive at a destination that doesn't offend others. But strictly speaking, in terms of the law, lobola is not a legal requirement. But there are formalities.
Okay.
Though, for instance, there is what is called the publication of bans or the obtainment of a marriage license. So it's either one of the two. One may elect to obtain a marriage license from the clerk of court at the magistrate's court, the civil court, for them to then proceed to enter into a marriage. Or they can proceed by way of bans. I think now you are familiar with this one.
Yes.
Whereby you announce in church for 3 consecutive weeks that Mr. So and so and Mrs. So and so intend to get married. Yes. And if anyone has an objection, then they have got to lodge it with the marriage office.
Okay.
Yes.
So now getting to that one, what if somebody objects to the marriage? What happens?
Now, if someone objects, the marriage officer obviously looks into the grounds of objection.
Okay.
To see if they are legally sustainable.
All right.
To stop the marriage. And if they are not legally sustainable, then the marriage can proceed, obviously.
So viewers, there are numbers that will be appearing on your screen right away. Send us your questions that you may be having on the discussion that we are having today, the law and your marriage. And hopefully, if time allows us, Mr. Deme here will be able to get to your questions. So, Mr. Deme, let's talk about solemnizing marriages. Take us through what happens, who must be there, who has the authority to solemnize the marriage, and where must it be done? Is it mandatory that to host a reception for that?
That's a very loaded question and a very pertinent one for that matter.
Okay.
Now, to begin with, the people who have to be present, obviously, the groom and the bride.
Okay.
The ones who intend to get married, they have to be present.
All right.
Number one, it cannot be by proxy. They have to be present. Number two, we have the marriage officer, who is either a magistrate or a minister of religion,
Okay.
who has the authority to solemnize the marriage. I must point out that it's not every minister of religion who has the authority to solemnize a marriage. I say that because of a number of said cases that I have encountered, whereby some people would believe that they got married because someone who is a minister of religion would have presided over a ceremony,
Okay.
and issued out some, piece of paper to say you are now married. But when the time of reckoning comes, someone will then realize that they were holding on to a useless piece of paper in the name of a seal for marriage, which is quite unfortunate. So the minister of religion has to have the requisite authority to preside over the marriage, and they also have to be present witnesses.
Okay.
The two witnesses are usually, they come as the best man or the best lady, but what the law requires is simply two witnesses. I think those are the people who are necessary to be present for the purposes of having a legal marriage to be contracted.
Two witnesses.
Two witnesses, marriage officer, the parties to the marriage. Then we're done. Now, you also talked about the issue of having these celebrations. Is it necessary?
Yes.
No, it's not even necessary. Of course, we do it because we want to eat, but and to celebrate and to pass our good, our congratulations to the people who would have gotten married. But strictly speaking, it's not necessary for someone to host an expensive ceremony to contract a marriage. You hear people saying, "Actually, see, we don't know about the marriage. We were not even invited." Blah 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 blah. No. The law does not make it a requirement for such to be held. Of course, because of our upbringing, sometimes people feel like it's taboo just to get married without notifying my uncle, my aunt, or my brother or my sister. But strictly speaking, it's not a necessity, a legal necessity.
But aren't you forgetting the parents of the bride or the groom?
Even them. Remember, I have highlighted that even their consent is not required. So if they invited to witness, it's good, but it's not a legal requirement. Their absence.
So the marriage officer can just solemnize a marriage as long as the two adults over age of 18 and over have agreed.
Yes.
And they have their two witnesses. According to the new law, they can have a legal marriage.
That's correct. Even in terms of the old law, as long as they were of 18 years,
okay,
they could proceed. Only when someone was 16 years, then the consent of the parent was required. But that was in terms of the old law. But now, with the coming in of our new constitution, which indicated that any person who is to start a family has to be 18 years, it means that our marriage laws had to be realigned with the constitution to do away with the scourge of child marriages. And I think it's a positive development, if you ask me.
All right. So just taking you a bit back, which means if this law has been there all along, that the presence of the parents was not mandatory. So it means people did not just know it's not mandatory, that they be there.
Well, I wouldn't say people didn't know. Mm-hmm. For instance, some knew.
Right.
Yes, some knew, but obviously people we are creatures of socialization.
Because the reason why I've asked you, Mr. Deme, is that because I'm sure you've been around many weddings. The aunties vanatete, they would say, "Pane maisi na kubviswa." This wedding is not going to proceed because pane maisi na kubviswa. Or Tezara would say, "Well, majasa angu anakuya." Yet the rice is there, the chicken is there, the bridal team is already dressed up, and the event would stop simply because Hetia Baba inakubviswa.
Yes, true. I think some might have been victims of ignorance, that they didn't know that the consent of the parent is not essential for the marriage to go ahead. And even the parents themselves might have thought that their consent was necessary to give a green light to the marriage. But there are also other people who perhaps might be in my bracket, who knew that this is the position of the law. But like what I was saying, being creatures of socialization, people would just say we need to also respect our culture and everything. But obviously, those are not to be taken as a legal requirement, and people must not then hold others to ransom on account of culture, because the law can actually be very stubborn, and someone might not like it when the two consenting adults then decide, "Mom and Dad, thank you for your input, but now we're going ahead with our marriage with or without you." It wouldn't be nice. So, yes, there are others who were victims of ignorance. There are others who might also just have said, "Look, we have to just not cause offense to anyone and follow culture."
I know that viewers right now, some of us are fuming. Some of us are wondering, where is this law going to? Because because I think we, as parents, we had a say in who our kids marry, when they should marry, how they should marry, where they should have their wedding happening. And others are fuming right now. And that's the reason why we have started this program, so that you at home will ask every question that you have. And okay, Mr. Deme. Now, so is it a crime? I'll say this one more time. Is it a crime if the parent gets to a wedding place simply because my daughter is married and I'm not informed? Is it a crime if I do everything in my power to stop the wedding?
Now, it can be a crime depending on what the parent would have done. But obviously, the first thing that would be off for me is, obviously, he would be disturbing other people's peace, or he would be trespassing if he is not invited. So you would commit a crime. But let me take you back to this issue of, there may be a misconception that this is coming as a new law. It has always been like that. The issue of consent not being required. And I also spoke about the issue of lobola. Let me tell you a very, very interesting, historical occasion. I think it was around 1982 when the Supreme Court ruled or made that what we call...
Before you get to that one, please, if you have any question, because now we are almost running out of time, I'll have one question or two to ask Mr. Deme here. So if you have any question, just go to the chat on the Facebook page, Edgar Productions, where you're watching us from, and let us know what your question is. Or even if you are watching this after we have done the program on this Sunday day, just put your questions over there, and we will definitely answer your questions in the next segment. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Now, I was relating to a historical event when the Supreme Court made the comment. I think it was then during the time of Chief Justice Tumchena that lobola is not a legal requirement. It should have been 1982 before we were born. History tells us that the former president of the Republic of Zimbabwe, he used to do this quite a number of times. He then, not interfering with the ruling, but was actually commenting in a political forum. And he said, okay, that is what the law says. But if you want to marry my sister here, Sabina, you will have to pay the ball. So
Okay.
that shows how our culture can actually, have a greater say in what we do, how we conduct ourselves. But the point still remains that it's not a legal requirement for lobola to be paid. And now it's not a legal requirement for the parents to issue their consent to allow their children to get married as long as they are of age. And in any event, anyone under the age of 18 cannot enter into a marriage. And I also need to complete this by indicating that the marriage officer also should issue out what is called a marriage certificate, which is then also registered with the Department of Marriages in Zimbabwe. This is very important at the Registrar General's office, because I have also encountered some, circumstances whereby someone would have the marriage certificate, but it's not reflecting when you do, due diligence for one reason or another to establish what is the status of this marriage, maybe for pensions or anything. Then you realize that the marriage is not registered. It doesn't exist within the database of the Register of Marriages. So the certificate issued by the marriage officer will have also to be returned to the Department of Marriages. This is very important.
Okay.
Yes.
So maybe you have time to say these things after in our next segments as to what exactly is in the marriage certificate, what exactly is it. Others don't have it. So what's so important about it if probably before we knew this law or before the law came, it was all right when we were where we were, what do I need? Is it important, the marriage certificate thing?
It is important, and it's not a new, development in terms of our law. It has always been like that. That if someone enters into a civil marriage, there has to be a marriage certificate which is validly issued in terms of the law, which bears the names of the parties, their ages, their addresses, the place where the marriage was consummated, the name of the marriage officer, and the names and signatures of the parties, and also of the signatures of the witnesses. And then there should be a stamp which also indicate that the marriage certificate was validly issued in terms of the law, which is the stamp of the Registrar of Marriages.
Okay.
Yes.
It looks like there is a lot of things to be said.
Yes, and now there is also the issue of the fingerprints as well.
Okay.
It was there before the ushering in of the new act that I have already alluded to.
Okay.
Yes.
So, Mr. Deme, I'm sure there is a lot of things to be said. The unpacking of different rights and obligations.
That's correct. There are quite a number of issues which I reckon are useful for the viewers to know about. For some, it may be common cause, but for some viewers, it's very important to highlight these issues so that they are better informed concerning this a phenomenon of marriages. Do we call it a phenomenon? What do you call it in your trade?
In my trend, it's not there. In my area of profession, we only end at having the marriage done, and then it's kind of like going to be a bit more, conflicting of interest, to be very honest, because as a pastor, as a churchman, it's going to be very difficult for me. I think we'll have to have probably another day, Mr. Deme, of bringing a marriage officer who is a pastor, so that he can unpack some of the feelings that he has towards it. Because as a pastor, I can imagine if I'm a marriage officer just standing there. We are used to having this statement made: who gives this daughter to this man in marriage? It's a statement that we are used to be hearing. And so one of the elders stands and says, "It's me." And then you feel, wow, I'm free now to solemnize the marriage. And now with the unpacking, not the new law, but with the unpacking that we are doing right now, I'm sure we still have to do it, but I don't know how are we going to handle it if the parent says, if we don't have anyone who is saying, I'm here to give my daughter in marriage to this young man, and no one says that, am I going to be able to continue having no one consenting?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. It will be very interesting to hear from the marriage officers themselves what they will do if there is no one to, give their daughter hand in marriage. But if it was me, I will tell you what I would do. If there is no one to give their daughter, I would do. This is a secret. We used to do it back at school. When you are naughty and you are called to, you are sent back home to go and call your father.
Your father.
We'll just go at the shops to look at some old men and say, Dad, please come here. Then they must say, please stop. And then the storm is over because you wouldn't dare to
go back home.
Yes. So maybe somebody might do that, saying that consent is not really necessary.
Viewers, yes, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And we will promise you next week on Sunday, this program is going to be there every Sunday by the grace of God. Hopefully, next Sunday we'll make sure we are on time, 7 o'clock. In the evening, make sure you make a date on this program, Edgar Productions, where we are talking about the legal talk. We're talking about the law and your marriage. Don't miss this segment, because you have seen there are a lot of things. Today, Mr. Deme was just unpacking, making an introduction of the things that we're going to be looking into. Hopefully, we'll be getting deeper into exactly what is the civil law, blah, 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 and all the stuff, so that the viewers can understand. So thank you very much. Remember to subscribe and hit the notification button so that you'll be notified if you happen to forget. You'll be notified when we are back again on this program, The Legal Talk, where we are talking legal issues that affect our community, affect our lives, affect our relationships. Because there's one thing that he said that I thought with time you'll explain more, because it's going to look like, Mr. Deme, there's going to be a war between the children and the parents, because what was keeping the family, if I can say, the family together was the ignorance of the law.
That's correct.
Daughters obeyed because they didn't know. So we are not bringing this program to make the young girls rebellious. You always have to respect your parents. You need their blessing after all.
That's correct. We were not here to cause the Third World War, are we?
No, we're not. We're not. Because you need the parent. Oh, by the way, culturally, the painful part is culturally, if my daughter happens to just go, she gets married, she'll have to come back to my wife when she's now about to give birth. The first delivery. She has to have her mother's sister's looking after her, teaching her how to bring up the baby. So one way or the other, we obey the law, but you still come back home.
That's correct. You hit the nail on the head. The program is not about causing children to be rebellious or to disregard the views of their parents or to break the hearts of their parents. No, law on its own is not the one that regulates society. We have religion. We have our culture, which has got some important values
Yes.
that we need to respect as well. But we are only sharing pertaining to what the law says. But it's not the ultimate arbiter of every societal dispute.
Yes.
No, we have other considerations to take into account. Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deme. So, next week, what are you bringing us?
Well, I don't know. But let's hear from the viewers what they intend to behave as the issues for discussion. After all, it's their program. But today we only touched on the civil marriage. We haven't touched on the customary marriages, the requirements, who can solemnize it. We haven't touched on this civil partnerships. What kind of animal is this? This is a new phenomenon altogether.
Okay.
We haven't even touched on the rights and obligations that flow from even the civil marriage. Now, we have to differentiate between civil marriage and civil partnerships. These are two different things. So,
Wow.
yeah, there is a whole lot of points to discuss on. But let's leave it to the viewers. After all, it's their program.
There you have it, viewers. Please, you have it. You determine what we're going to talk about. Is it the civil marriage or the civil partnership? Is it whatever you have heard from Advocate Deme here? Whatever you think we can start covering from next week, please let us know. Give us your needs. Let us know what you want us to discuss on, and definitely we'll be here to discuss those issues and put you in picture, in the loop of what is happening. So thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Deme. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for inviting me. It's my pleasure.
Please, you remember, subscribe. We'll be here for you. And after all has been said, here at Edgar Productions, we say quality is what we give to you. So have a blessed week. We meet again next week. Bye-bye.